My pleasure. Well, I think what happened on April 2nd was not so much the timing as the magnitude. People were shocked by the size of the combination of the universal 10% tariff and then the so-called reciprocal tariffs. And we saw the fallout in financial markets and the reaction around the globe. The magnitudes are now familiar to people. In fact, most of these tariffs have been in place for quite some time now. The average effective tariff rate was 15%. These new announcements raise it to 17%. So the world is adapting to the existence of the tariffs, and I think you get less of the big shock, and now it's more the slow and deepening impact of having these tariffs embedded in the U.S. supply chains and consumers' decisions. Well, the president has a whole series of tariffs, which he thinks of as sectoral tariffs. These are the aluminum, the steel, this would be copper, autos, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, foreign films is on that list. All of those have been invoked in the interest of national security. And so first you have to decide, well, is there really a national security risk that surrounds copper that merits a 50% cost increase for imports? And then there's a second question, which is, will the tariff alleviate that risk in any way? Will it produce more domestic production of copper, or will we simply just be paying more for copper? And I think there's a real question in some of these cases about whether the tariffs will do anything to change the underlying production in the U.S. and need for the materials in the United States, and thus alleviate the national security risk at all. And so all we've done then is make things more expensive for domestic producers, and we've certainly seen that with the steel and aluminum tariffs so far. Well, certainly on the merits, I mean, no one thinks of tariffs as inflationary in the sense that they will push prices ever further higher. But there's no question tariffs raise costs, and costs get passed along in the form of higher prices. These tariffs will cause prices to rise for some period. Fed Secretary Jerome Powell has emphasized again and again, the whole goal is to have that be a temporary phenomenon and not let it get embedded into the system. And so I think everyone's agreeing that they don't want to have a long-run inflation problem, but you will have something you have to deal with in the short run. The discussion about whether the Fed's policy is correct or not, reasonable people can disagree. You put tariffs into this system, you have two pressures. One is higher prices. The Fed would typically raise rates or hold rates to fight that. The other is slower growth in employment, and the Fed would usually cut rates to mediate that. Well, now you have to decide which direction you're going to go at first, and people can disagree about that. So I don't think that's shocking. I think the bigger problem is the president openly auditioning people who are only going to come down one direction on that and have lower rates, because he's been pushing the Fed for that for quite some time. Yeah. Well, I think you can make that case on the merits. For example, we got last Friday's employment report, and everyone said, oh, great report, 140,000 jobs. Well, not really. 70,000 that were state and local governments. Within the private sector, only education and health hired. Hiring's at a standstill out there. There are a lot of people who say, okay, we need to cut to offset that. The opposition would be, well, if you do that, you're giving up on inflation, and inflation's not back to the 2% target. We, the Fed, promised to get it back to the 2% target. And so there's going to be a vigorous discussion at the Fed about what should be done. They've had this discussion for months. They've elected in each case to do nothing, stay where they are. We'll see what happens in the July meeting. Thank you.